This year, the second season of Peacemaker premiered, the next entry in James Gunn's new DC universe, and a soft reboot of the first season, following the same cast as the previous season, now in the DCU, after the events of Superman, with the crew having to take care of their personal problems and issues while dealing with all the good and bad that comes with alternate dimensions. As it began to premiere in August, the season received just as much, if not more praise than the first season, especially as more and more episodes of the season released, with episodes 6 and 7 receiving near universal acclaim. But once the final episode released, public reception quickly changed. Many people online strongly disliked the finale, and even hated it, claiming it ruined the whole season and was a terrible episode and end to the season. But I disagree with that. In fact, I think the exact opposite. I believe that season 2 finale of Peacemaker was not only the best episode of the season, but a perfect finale to the show. And in today's video, I will show you every reason why. And by the end, you will believe that Peacemaker season 2 had a perfect finale. But wait, before you go ahead and dislike the video that I expect many of you will, hear me out for a minute. I'm not saying season 2 of Peacemaker is bad by any means. Every episode's pretty solid, but just isn't as strong as the first season and is quite a step down. Probably due to the fact that James Gunn was working on another show and a film at the same time, and his writing isn't the strongest because of that as well. Another thing is that I'm not glazing or defending Gunn as well in this video. I'm just giving my thoughts and opinions on this matter, as I believe that some of the responses online were vastly exaggerated. With that being said, let's dive into this topic and I'll explain all of my arguments. Oh, and obviously spoiler alerts for Peacemaker Season 2 if you haven't seen it already, and minor spoilers for Creature Commandos and Superman as well. Before I dive into the criticisms and hate towards Full Nelson, I'd first like to take a look at everything that happens during the episode, and how this makes it a good finale as well. You can skip ahead if you want, but some parts of this episode are either misunderstood or forgotten about entirely. The episode begins with Chris and Harcourt talking to each other about the chaotic events of the past few episodes at a diner. Harcourt feeling useless now that she's no longer part of Argus. But Chris doesn't agree with her, and tells her that she's really talented no matter what happens. After the two leave, they happen to see the rock duo Nelson performing nearby on a boat. Despite not wanting to go, Chris eventually drags Harcourt onto the boat, and the two enjoy the concert. Eventually, the two share a kiss, but Harcourt leaves, leaving Chris by himself disappointed. The opening establishes Chris's and Harcourt's relationship growing deeper and closer. Peacemaker spent half of the season trying to get together with the Nazi world Harcourt because it was just easier, when in reality he should have focused his time and energy on the one from his world. He's finally beginning to grow closer and closer to her, with this scene brilliantly forming a deeper bond between the two heroes. Screw Rick Flag Jr., I guess. Speaking of Rick Flag, his father finally uses Chris's device to unlock the door and enter the quantum unfolding chamber, while Chris remains in jail. Their goal is to find a dimension that is usable and safe, full of quote-unquote natural resources for them to use in the future. Harcourt is one of those people entering those dimensions while Economos helps on the outside, but they fail to find one, and one dimension full of little critters brutally murders some Argus members. Harcourt, Economos, and some other people are worried about what other dimensions hold for them, and if they'll die as well, along with judging Flag's leadership. Taking inspiration from Lex Luthor, Flag recruits Luthor's crew from Superman to help out. Flag growing increasingly more sadistic, looking for an ideal dimension for his goals. Later on, the 11th Street crew reunite to discuss what to do with their friend Chris, and agree to finally use Adrian's stashed drug money from the previous episodes to bail Chris out. But surprisingly, he just takes eagerly and leaves them behind, to their disappointment. Flag and Argus eventually find a suitable dimension that they codename Salvation. Flag tells the US government his true goals. Instead of sending metahumans to Arkham Asylum or Belle Reve, they should send them to this place instead, as they just waste space and resources that could be used elsewhere. Sacha Bordeaux heavily disagrees with Flag though and tells Harcourt his true intentions and helps the kids to find Chris. Meanwhile, Danielle Brooks delivers the most emotional performance of the episode as Adebayo, going to talk with her ex-wife, accepting that the two weren't meant to be together, as their lives are too vastly different from one another to be happy. Aside from Chris, Adebayo has the most development out of any character throughout the show, with her own separate hardships from the main cast, and seeing her develop and change as a character is very satisfying to see, especially during this episode. The kids eventually find Chris, who refuses to go with them, as he feels he only kills the closest people around him and feels like he's a threat even to his own friends. But they convince him to come back. He was born and raised to be a heartless killer by evil people, and we've seen him throughout the whole show change for the better and become a better person overall. They're all important to one another, and need each other in order to thrive. Chris also confronts Harcourt and asks if their kiss really meant something that night, which he says it did, motivating Chris even further. The 11th Street Kids, along with Judo Master, Bordeaux, and Flurry, formed their own agency, Checkmate, seeing all of the guys setting things up and interacting humorously with one another, with our glorious king eagerly giving Economos a hug, as Economos had become the second closest person to the powerful eagle, aside from Chris himself. Economos had the least to do this season out of the main five characters, but this episode does a good job of giving him something meaningful to do. Coming full circle, Chris and Harcourt go to another boat concert, this time with Foxy Shazam, then perform the theme song for the season while the couple have the time of their lives. Later, Chris returns to his motel only to get kidnapped by none other than Argus himself. Flag confronts Chris and tells him he forged his signature so he could become the first person put onto Salvation. Chris is thrown into the dimension and the doors close, ending Peacemaker on a cliffhanger as Chris is all by himself as the show ends. Peacemaker most likely won't have a third season as Gunn mentioned, so Full Nelson is probably the final episode of the whole series. Knowing that, the finale does a perfect job of wrapping up every loose thread and leaving on a satisfying conclusion. Chris, Harcourt, Adebayo, Economos, and Adrian, along with the rest of the cast, all contribute something and wrap up their arcs this season with future seeds planted for future DCU projects. Emotional at times and hilarious at others, Peacemaker shows it just isn't a regular superhero show. It's a mix of action, drama, and comedy that creates a really unique show in today's landscape that can stand out on its own, even if you have no knowledge of DC. Although this story has come to a close, we'll certainly see these characters in the future, especially due to Gunn's fondness for his obscure characters, and we'll most likely see this continued in the next few projects or so. Overall, Full Nelson is a perfect finale. Or is it? If you've seen any other discourse about this finale, most of it has been quite negative. Few positive thoughts in sight. There were numerous criticisms, no major cameos, the slow pacing, no big fights or plot threads from the Nazi world returning, Rick Flag's inconsistent character, the cliffhanger ending, Checkmate being so abruptly introduced, too many musical montages, and just not feeling like a finale overall. On IMDb, excluding the final episode, the average episode rating for season 2 was 8.27, slightly less than season's 1, 8.475, which is fine since it's a slightly worse season. But with the final episode factored in, it drops to an 8.075 due to the finale's rating of a 6.7. Not terrible, but not good either. It's okay if you didn't enjoy the finale or the things it does, but to say it was terrible and ruined the whole season, and to say the DCU was in trouble, I think that's an exaggeration. So now, it's time for me to refute all of these statements and show why Full Nelson was a perfect finale. The first one, and a major one for many people, was that there wasn't any surprise appearances or cameos at any point during the episode. During season 1's finale, we saw the whole Justice League at the very end. Granted, it was just Aquaman and the Flash, but it was still better than this. James Gunn originally wanted Ryan Reynolds to appear as Deadpool when they were going through the quantum doors, but yeah, legal stuff preventing that, unsurprisingly. But did we really need cameos or guest appearances? The beginning of the season already had Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, and the introduction of Maxwell Lord. And we did have Lex Luthor appear in one scene. But other than that, like, what cameos would there be? This is just the third project in the DCU. Not many people to bring back. Like, who would we have seen? The Creature Commandos? Mr. Terrific? It wouldn't make sense to introduce any new characters in the finale. It wouldn't fit in well. It would have been nice to see Viola Davis return as Amanda Waller since she hasn't appeared all season. And maybe we could introduce Bloodsport to the DCU, but that didn't happen unfortunately. Although I was slightly disappointed, like many others, that there weren't any cameos, it was just an expectation and not something that had to happen. You can't really take points away from the finale because of that. Now, a big thing I saw that angered a lot of people was Rick Flagg's inconsistent character, compared to his other appearances in the other two DCU projects, and how his turn as a villain came out of nowhere and ruined him. So let's talk about that. I'm hardly going to mention his role in Superman because he hardly does much in that film other than question Luthor's goals, arresting Superman, and later appears at the end watching the events of the finale unfold. Nothing major changes about his character as that's not focus of the film, which is fine. The only important thing we see is him becoming head of Argus and distrusting Luthor. Now let's go back to the first project of the DCU, Creature Commandos, something I watched for the first time just for this video. In the show, Flag is put in charge of the Creature Commandos. They're basically the Suicide Squad, except made of creatures instead. This is the most we learn about Flag, about how the death of his son deeply affected him and led to him and his wife divorcing and struggling emotionally to cope with this, and while being in charge of a dangerous group of individuals. Flag is shown to be a heroic leader who cares about the Commandos and all of their strengths and weaknesses, and seems like a good person overall. Although he looks quite different animated than in real life, since Flag's actor Frank Grillo had to also film Tulsa King around the same time. That's basically everything we see. Creature Commandos doesn't have a central protagonist and focuses on the five commandos and Eric Frankenstein as well. And this show is extremely short. If you would add up the lengths of all 7 episodes and exclude the intros and credits, the total runtime of the show would be a little over 2 hours, which is really short for a TV show and one of my biggest problems with it. Along with the fact this is the third time James Gunn put together a ragtag group of individuals. It doesn't really hit the same as the first 2 times. And after his loss to Clayface, Flag doesn't do anything in the final 2 episodes since he's quite incapacitated. But overall, these 2 appearances establish Flag as a heroic man who fights as hard as he can for the US government, even if he has a few problems that can intervene with that. He is portrayed a little differently in Peacemaker though. Flag now knows that Chris was the man who killed his son, and as a result is making it his goal to capture him and make him suffer for ending the life of his son. Rick Flag Sr. serves a different purpose in Peacemaker compared to the other shows. He was one of the central protagonists in Creature Commandos and a side character in Superman, but now he serves as the main antagonist of the season, directly opposing Chris and the rest of the 11th Street Kids. It's easy to forget that Chris has done some pretty horrendous things in the past since he's the protagonist of the series, but look at where Flag is coming from. He sees Chris the same way we see him in the Suicide Squad, a heartless killer willing to kill men, women, and children in order to satisfy his goals. We've seen Peacemaker grow and change as a person, but Flag hasn't, instead seeing the monster that we were originally introduced to. And along with that, Chris killed Flag's only son, the closest thing he had in his whole life that he raised as his successor, someone he knew for 40 years. And to finally have a chance to avenge his death, most people would probably do the same thing as Flag would if they had that power. A child usually witnesses their parent's death. It should never be the other way around. In regards to the final episode, the power of being the director of Argus went into Flag's mind, willing to do anything to create a hell for his son's killer. Power went into Flag's head, and after his talk with Lex Luthor, showed him what a powerful leader is, even when faced with deadly threats. Luthor's team supports Flag's goals, and thus helped create a different man, one who now cares more about his own goals rather than the country's as a whole. Oh, and he's also doing lines of coke, which probably doesn't help matters that much. The Rick Flag Sr. we see at the beginning of Creature Commandos is not the same Rick Flag we see at the end of Peacemaker Season 2, as power and revenge corrupted this once heroic patriot into a man who wants to inflict pain onto the man who hurt his family the most. Now, let's talk about the smaller criticisms I noticed. The first is that the Nazi world felt very underutilized and had no impact in the finale. This is a complaint I have about not just the finale, but the season as a whole. After we found out Germany won World War II and what kind of world they live in, we spent a single episode with that realization before leaving. An extra episode or so, or revealing this earlier, would allow better world building and to understand this cruel world more as well. This is a season problem, not finale one. If this world would be more established in the season, it would be really disappointing to not see anything. But as it stands, it's fine as it is. Another problem relating to this is Chris and his relationship with the Otherworld Keith, and how this was also abandoned as well. I highly doubt we've seen the last of Keith, similar to Flag. Chris and his crew killed his real brother and father as well, before escaping. A double whammy. In the future, I suspect Keith will try to kill Chris and the rest of the crew as well for revenge. And it would be interesting if Keith would somehow end up on Salvation as well. A scene should have been added of what's going on with Keith in his world, but that wasn't added. James Gunn probably has future plans with his character, so I highly doubt this is the last we've seen of him. Another thing I've seen criticism was with the pacing of this episode. The first 7 episodes have an average runtime of 39.14 minutes, including the intro and credits, slightly less than Season 1's 42.75-minute average, but that's nothing compared to the finale's whopping 57-minute run. Since the episodes this season were significantly shorter, I'm not mad about this episode's length. It has a lot to bring to the table and doesn't have that many dull moments. Some parts are slow when necessary, but every scene brings something of value whether you realize it or not on your first watch. Checkmate's introduction felt quite abrupt by many, but the plot threads were set up in earlier episodes. Adebayo had tried and failed to create a mercenary service at the very beginning of the season, and after Flag's actions caused the remaining main characters to leave Argus, what else were they going to do? Just sit there and do nothing? Granted, many people feel like it's Checkmate in name only, but this is just the beginning of the organization, and like many things set up in this episode, it will be addressed in the near future. And another thing that bugged a bunch of guys online was that there were too many musical montages, which, wow, 2 concerts is the breaking point. Now, I'll admit it, I wasn't a big fan of either song played, and I don't like the theme song of the season, so I don't really care for them performing it again. I'll take Do You Want to Taste It any day over this. But from a narrative standpoint, it does make a little sense. Chris and Harcourt really connected at the beginning of the episode during the Nelson concert. So at the end of the episode, when they bond even closer than before at the Foxy Shazam concert, it really shows how they've grown closer to one another. It's nothing compared to the one at the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but I'll take this, I guess. The last 2 things I want to talk about that can go hand in hand with one another is that being the cliffhanger ending and this not feeling like a true season finale. First, when it comes to the cliffhanger ending, people are acting like we'll never see these characters ever again. Just because the Peacemaker show is done doesn't mean there won't be a follow-up show. The characters will probably return sooner than we think, and it leaves the viewer wondering what will happen next. If everything would have ended perfectly, then why would we need to see them in the future? Sure, Chris getting thrown to Salvation happened relatively quickly, but it takes the viewer by surprise and should leave us wondering what will happen next. And if maybe Peacemaker will get a 3rd season, which it probably isn't, it would be a good way to start a new season. Within a year or so, I feel like Salvation will be explored more in depth, so I wouldn't be too worried about Chris. And finally, the finale not feeling like a finale to many. I've seen people call this a mid-season finale, something that will be followed up in the next episode. If you feel that way, I can't really help you change the way you feel, as I kind of don't understand why people feel that way. Every plot point of Season 2 was wrapped up relatively well, with Checkmate and Salvation being set up for a later date, and not having much material to work with more episodes. Sure, Keith and other parts of the Nazi world could have returned, but I doubt this is the last we've seen of them. A lot of people gave decent criticisms of the Season 2 finale, but until we've seen future projects in the DCU, We'll just have to wait and see what will happen with these characters we've grown to love. When it comes to future DCU projects and whether we'll see the follow up to these characters, some projects have high hopes while others don't. When it comes to Clayface next year, I'm pretty certain nothing from Peacemaker will be addressed there. That feels like a Batman story that maybe Rick Flag will appear in. Supergirl next year, again, probably won't have much to do with these characters. James Gunn isn't working on either project except as an executive producer. Maybe Flag or Checkmate will appear, but small cameos like the one Peacemaker had in Superman as a commercial or billboard or something is all I would expect. Man of Tomorrow probably has the biggest shot of featuring this plot thread, as the film will be written and directed by James Gunn, which we'll have to wait a couple years to see. And although this is a stretch, I feel like maybe Lanterns could follow up this plot thread briefly. Although Gunn is just an executive producer on this show, and it's looking to be a much different series than Creature Commandos or Peacemaker, being a detective show like True Detective or Slow Horses, finally featuring the Green Lantern Corps in some sort of live action DC role, we don't talk about the shitty Ryan Reynolds film. I feel like this could maybe follow up the Salvation story. I haven't mentioned the Salvation comic book run whatsoever, but it was essentially Batman, Superman, Flash, and other iconic DC villains. They're exiled from Earth to another planet with no resources given for survival as they try to escape. Although we don't know who the villain of Lanterns will be, and don't know if he'll be the main antagonist, I feel like maybe Sinestro, Green Lantern's arch nemesis, could be sent off to Salvation if captured. We have very few villains in the DCU, so it's likely most villains will be sent there, and we'll finally get to see Chris and how he's doing. And hey, maybe somehow Keith could end up there, with the three having to deal with one another amongst other villains that could be sent there, like other villains of Superman and Supergirl, and Clayface as well. But hey, that's just a theory. Let me get back to my conclusion. The most controversial episode of the whole series, the Peacemaker Season 2 finale, divided the fandom of the show right at the very end of its run. With just as many haters as supporters, the critical and audience reception was divided. There were quite a few critiques for the finale, but from what I've seen and dived into throughout this whole video, many of these attacks are just personal preferences and things people weren't expecting to see, and being disappointed with everything overall. Peacemaker Season 2 isn't perfect. It is definitely the weaker of the two seasons of the show, but it's still a strong season of television overall with lots of emotions, humor, and drama to enjoy. The finale perfectly ended the storylines of the previous 7 episodes, and although we would have liked to see some more things, we can't be greedy and should be okay with the things that we got. I thoroughly enjoyed Full Nelson, and it may have even been my favorite episode of the whole season, but it's okay if you didn't like it. We are all entitled to our own opinions. But to say it was terrible and ruined the whole season, along with the future of the DCU being bleak, is quite an over-exaggeration. So that's why I consider the season 2 and series finale of Peacemaker as a whole to be a perfect masterpiece of television. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, but what did you think of the finale? Did you agree with my arguments? Or was I just completely wrong the whole entire time? As always, thank you to each and every one of you for watching this video to the very end. Like, comment, share, and subscribe if you want to see some more TV content like this, which I'll do from time to time alongside my film content. I hope to see you all next time. Bye.